This is going to be the first video in a series of commentary runs. So I'm watching my footage from a 21 Shadowmoon Burial Grounds. The affixes are Explosive, Tyrannical and Sanguine. I'm going to be talking about what I'm thinking about and planning around as a healer and the mechanics that I know of. If you see any big egregious mistakes, please throw it in the comments at the bottom so I can learn. So for most of this dungeon, pretty much all of it, I'm not worrying about the tank at all. I know that he's a really good DK player, and I also am fairly sure that he doesn't need any healing from me. So for a lot of this, all I'm trying to do is damage. On that first pack, you can kick the Loyalist. Your priority kick is going to be on the heal, the Shadow Mend. But you can also, if you coordinate with your group, you can kick every Shadow Bolt cast as well. We skip the big void blueberry at the bottom of the stairs. If you kill that first pack fast enough, you can basically ensure that he's padding to the right so that you can go left. We pull this next pack with the spiders. Although that isn't necessary, a lot of other groups will pull the top spiders, jump down to snap them to the bottom spiders and kill them all together. For whatever reason, we didn't do that here. I mean, either way is fine. But that pack is very similar to the first pack, where all you're really doing is kicking the Loyalist casts, and that's about it. We're then just going to blow up the spiders. For much of this run, I'm going to be on explosives duty. So there are a couple of times where I'll hang back and just be ready to snipe explosives rather than running in to do damage. This is probably the most dangerous pack, at least for the beginning of the dungeon, the first half of the dungeon. This is the most dangerous pack, especially on Fortified. That is because these reanimated ritual bone dudes do an ability called, I think it's Void Slash, and that just wrecks the tank. So your options here is to CC as much as possible, rely on the tank to use big cooldowns, or you can use your healing cooldowns to keep the tank alive. The other thing a lot of people do, I'm assuming this happens more often in higher keys, is that you will basically just kick the Loyalist and then CC with Ring of Peace or slows or whatever on the 3 remaining adds, and the tank just kites to avoid the Void Slash. This boss is somewhat actually of a healer check in higher keys. I think this is the most difficult boss to heal in the dungeon. And that is because of this ability you're seeing here, Whispers of the Damned, I think it's called. Now I have my bigwig set up so that it gives me a 3-2-1 warning when that goes off. And all I'm trying to do here is make sure that I'm always trading a cooldown into the Whispers cast. It happens about every 30 seconds, but it is also a little bit finicky. Yeah, it's kind of the thing you have to get used to because it isn't on a very strict timer. It's the other abilities the boss cast, it's like an ability delay. So if the boss is doing the add channel, then you might get a Whispers right after and the timer will be off, which is what's happening right now. Or the Dark Communion thing goes out and then the Whispers goes out right after. What I should have done here is used Yulon for that second Whispers, because that's the one that's more difficult to heal, because it immediately follows the AoE, the group AoE with the runes. When I don't have Yulon up, Yulon's up every minute. When it's not up for each of the Whispers, I will trade a different cooldown. So TFT when I can for the haste buff and the extra enveloping healing, or I'll trade Revival or even Life Cocoon and Health Pot myself. I should also be trading a cooldown for all of these. I should be using Diffuse, I should be using Dampen, even Stone Skin for the 10% DR. The rest of this boss fight is fairly straightforward. You kill the ad, use whatever CC you can to slow it or knock it back or anything when it gets close. And you're really just trying to get through each of the healing checks on these Whispers. Now I should have life cocooned one person at the start of that Whispers. I should have used TFT, and then I should have popped a personal defensive for myself and effectively just spot healed 2 people through the rest of that. This is also one of those fights where I'm really not too concerned about damage, just because there is actually quite a lot of healing and mobility to worry about, and positioning with the daggers and things. So all I'm really doing here is just trying to heal through the whispers and help kill the ad. This pack can be quite difficult if anyone stops the Dominator's casting. The idea here is that, I mean, I'm going to sit for a full drink because I know that the tank should be fine, and I know that the group won't be, well, other than that Inferno proc. The idea is that you basically just DPS the Dominators down and you let them cast. You don't interrupt them at all. Once they're interrupted, they are much more dangerous. They start doing those rending Void Lash casts, which really hurt people. But here was a similar kind of thing. My idea was to just get my debuff up on all the mobs and stand at the back to avoid getting meleeed by any of the ads that spawn, these subjugated souls, and then help with explosive. What you want to do here is pull these 2 exhumers when they're at the bottom of this little ramp together. And the reason for that is that if you pull the exhumer that pats up and down that little corridor, if you pull him up the top of his path, he'll cast the exhumed souls to bring up the spirits. But you'll get basically 4 of those spirits if you pull these 2 guys together, because each of them will bring up 2 spirits. But if you pull the exhumers at the bottom, they'll both do the cast, but there's only 2 like graves, I guess, to pull the spirits out of, so you only get 2 spirits. You need to kick the spirit casts, I think it's like a death bolt. It will one-shot whoever it goes off on. This boss, there isn't that much to it. This is a boss where I'm really just trying to do as much damage as possible. There isn't much to heal. Ideally, I'm going to be saving a defensive for when I get swapped into the other phase or the other realm to kill my spirit, because that is the only part of the boss fight where you could possibly need a defensive. Nothing else, all the other damage is completely avoidable. So the boss will teleport to a player, drop this AoE, you just run out of it. And I think for the most part, this ad phase is what everyone in the group should be using their defensive on. Because, like I said, there just isn't any other reason to use, there is no other place or time to use a defensive in this boss fight. And if you don't kill the ad quickly, you can die. You'll see at the end of this boss fight, what a lot of groups do, or actually what a lot of tanks do, is they run over one of the graves, these purpley rune things on the ground around the boss. You run over it, you spawn an exhumer that comes out, or a spirit, whatever it's called. And the idea is that you pull that at the very end of the boss fight. So when the boss is 10%, 5% or something like that. And the reason for that is, as far as I'm aware, is that it still gives count when it dies, and it actually despawns when the boss dies. So you can effectively run over the rune, spawn the ad. You probably want to kick it once, because like I said, it'll do the death bolt cast. And if the death bolt cast goes off, someone's going to get one shot. But if you kick it once and then kill the boss, it will despawn and give count. This pack is similar to the pack right after the first boss. It's the same kind of deal. You want to leave the Dominators casting. You don't want to interrupt them at all if you can help it. And then you want to kill the Exhumer, stop the casts, and you want to make sure that these subjugated souls don't melee you to death. Unfortunately, we let a Death Bolt go off there and the Boomy got one-tapped. If there's any place to die in this dungeon, this pack is the one that hurts the least. If you die at any point before the second boss here, you don't want to release if you can help it, because the run back is pretty brutal. We're going into the big little spider pack with the big spider here. I know that most people, and especially most groups, are going to try and do their big damage. I want to pump the meters here, so I'm hanging back a little bit. I'm going to use my Zen Pulse and Chi Burst, but other than that, I'm going to hang back as much as I can to kill explosives. This is basically the same pack, just bigger. You've now got 2 priority interrupts. If any of these monstrous corpse spiders get their cast off, it's probably going to be game over for most higher keys, unless you can revival off the debuff. As long as we know we have Kick's handle, we can pull this into the worm. And I think most groups are going to wait until both of these spiders are dead before they pull the bats that pad across the bridge. All I'm doing here is damage because there isn't that much to heal. I'm dropping my tiger statue there to try and get a little bit of damage on the bats, and our group's plan here, or every group's plan, should be to stop all of the bat casts here. You can either assign individual kicks, or what most groups do is just try and use AoE stops, Ring of Peace, Leg Sweep, Shockwave, Roar from the Druids, things like that. If my mana was low here because I had to heal a lot more, I was pumping a lot more damage or something in other weeks where I wasn't too worried about explosives, I would be using this time on the worms to get as much mana back as possible. My goal here is to contribute damage but also conserve mana. If I can avoid drinking before the worm boss, that's a few seconds saved, which is pretty much always my goal on this bridge. In this instance, my mana is fine, so I'm using Rising Sun Kicks. But if it was low, I would just be Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick spamming to make sure my mana is high going into the boss fight. This boss fight is a bit of a meme for most groups, or what most of the community thinks at the moment. It's very long. There really isn't that much that happens, but there is one phase that you really need to heal through. Now, ideally here, most groups are always going to want to stack up on the tank at the beginning here. And the idea is that if the whole group is stacked in melee range, that means wherever the spit goes, the whole group can still stand in it and still hit the boss. So that's all. This whole boss fight, every strategy really just revolves around doing as much damage as possible, because it is quite a long fight. I am doing a little bit of healing here, but not much. The phase that I'm worried about as a healer on this boss fight is the add phase. So adds have just spawned, the body slams have come out, and I've popped Yulon. Because when all of the adds do their corpse breath, you can get quite a lot of damage going out at once. So I'm happy to trade every single cooldown I have if I have to in this phase. It only happens once, and it is the only really deadly part of the fight. It's also a very long fight, and this add phase happens early, so like I said, you can trade every cooldown you have, and it will be back up after the boss fight ends. From this point onwards, all I'm doing is just avoiding the slams, staying in melee range, and doing as much damage as possible. That's pretty much the whole fight at this point. For us on a 21 Tyrannical, this was still almost a 4-minute boss fight, or 4 minutes, 4 seconds. So I actually got to use Touch of Death twice, which was nice. This next pack is more of the same thing. You just want to make sure that you kick both of the monstrous corpse spiders. We missed one. I could have revivaled here to get rid of the disease, I believe, and like save that mechanic fail. I intentionally didn't because I wasn't sure if I would need it for the next double blueberry pack. And I also know the run back is right behind us. So one person dying there isn't a huge deal. As for these next blueberries, this is somewhat manageable on tyrannical. It gets much more difficult on fortified. I always want to make sure I'm going into this boss fight with full mana. Now you can also, especially if you have a couple of ranged DPS in your group, like you're about to see here, you can range these two pulses. I think it's Void Pulse. You can line of sight them, rather than range them. And if you line them, you just avoid the damage. It makes it much easier to heal. This is the first time I've done this, but usually the way I heal this is I know that I'm going to get 2 Void Pulses, then a bit of breathing room with the Void Eruptions that go out, then 2 more Void Pulses, then a bit of breathing room, 2 more Void Pulses, and so on. What you want, which is what our group is doing here, is to DPS down one of the Void Spawns as quickly as possible so that you only get 1 Void Pulse rather than 2. You can also get 3 in a row, but my thinking here is all I'm trying to do is have a defensive up for every set of Void Pulses that go off, especially the first and second. And I'm always trying to trade a cooldown into that. So the first time I'll use Yulon, the second time I'll use Revival or TFT if I need it. And the third time Yulon should be back up again, or hopefully one of those blueberries should be dead. Now this boss, especially as a Mistweaver, can be a little challenging. It's more about you having to remember that you are melee and you need a ranged player on this fight. So you have to have a ranged DPS if you want to play this fight as a Mistweaver. And that is because these AoEs that drop on the ground, Malevolence, I think it's called, will always target a ranged player, and if they can't hit a ranged player, they'll go out randomly. And if they do proximal damage, or proximity-based damage, so if they target your group and your whole group stacked on the boss, they're going to half health your whole group every time it ticks until you move away from it. We have 2 melee here. 2 ranged. I actually think it would have been easier if we only had the Warlock, but having multiple range is fine, as long as they're happy and they know what's happening. As long as they know that they're going to be baiting the casts away from the group, and as soon as it goes down, you just saw the Warlock got hit with one and he ran straight away, which is perfect. If the ranged DPS stay near the AoE damage, they're probably going to get 2-tapped. So you need to be prepared as the healer to basically be just healing the ranged DPS the whole boss fight. And obviously like avoiding the mechanics. If you see that your group is going to have to be killing a skeleton, the Ritual of Bones guys, to make a hole in the wall near the Malevolence that's gone out and that is pulsing, that's when you want to use a cooldown. So in my case, that would be Yulon or Revival or even Life Cocoon. The other thing to remember here is that if you have somewhat squishy DPS soaking the Malevolence casts, you're going to burn through quite a lot of mana. That's why I'm saying that it would have been better to just have the Warlock, especially with Gate and Teleport and stuff. If they need to, they can get away from the AoE quite quickly, but they can also do quite a lot of self-healing, which makes your job as a healer much easier. In this situation, I am not trying to prioritize or focus on damage at all, and really the only thing I'm worried about is the mechanics. Help out with explosives, don't get hit by the wall, heal the ranged DPS, and conserve as much mana as possible. And that is because this fight is quite long, and there is constant sustained AoE damage going out, as you can see here. So what I'm trying to do is just make sure I don't go I'm happy to use the mana especially because it's such a predictable damage pattern. I'm happy to use the mana and play quite safe with some quick enveloping mist kind of spot healing, as long as I know that the boss is going to be dead soon and I can still fall back on like Yulon for my mana saving recovery and stuff like that. So I'm not trying to use as little mana as possible. I'm just trying to make sure that I go at about the same time that the boss dies, if that makes sense. I could have done a much better job doing damage on this boss, but like I said, I was really just more focused on healing the range DPS and conserving my mana. Unfortunately, as a Mistweaver, pressing Rising Sun Kick often is going to burn through a lot of my mana bar. I've done this dungeon on a 20, and even on a Fortified, I believe, this last boss, I was pressing Rising Sun Kick on cooldown, I was contributing damage, and I ended up spending about 65% of my mana bar on that boss fight just on Rising Sun Kick. If you have any other questions about the dungeon or my UI or anything, or you have some criticisms of things I've done wrong, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. That helps me learn. So thanks everyone for watching, and algorithm stuff.